She was known in her village as a quiet girl, someone who would hardly ever speak loudly or attract attention. Her life was simple and peaceful. She belonged to a family that was respected for their honesty and kindness. They didn't have a lot of money or fancy things, but they were content with what they had. Every morning, she would wake up early, help her mother prepare breakfast, and tidy their modest home. Her father worked as a carpenter, crafting furniture for neighbors. His hard-working hands showed signs of age and labor. She admired her father's honesty and dedication. Watching him work tirelessly taught her the importance of sincerity and commitment. Her elder brother, a cheerful young man, had a job at a nearby shop. He was friendly and popular, always greeting everyone with a smile. His earnings supported the family and brought stability to their household. Life was smooth, quiet, and predictable until one day, a storm of challenges shook their family's peace. Her father suddenly fell seriously ill. At first, they hoped it was nothing serious, just a minor fever or temporary weakness. But soon, they realized his illness was far more severe. Doctors visited, prescribing medicines that cost far more than their humble earnings could handle. As days passed, her father's condition worsened. His illness made him unable to work, and this caused the family's financial situation to decline. Rapidly, her elder brother tried his best to cover the expenses. He worked extra hours and even took odd jobs on weekends, hoping to manage the bills somehow. But luck wasn't on their side. Unexpectedly, the small shop where he worked shut down due to financial losses. The owner apologized deeply, but had no choice. Her brother was suddenly without a job, leaving their family with zero income. Now their world seemed to collapse around them. Each evening, the family sat silently, hiding worries behind forced smiles, trying to maintain some positivity. Meals grew simpler, and their small savings disappeared quickly. She watched silently as her mother quietly sold jewelry and household items, hoping to collect enough money to buy medicines for her husband and food for her children. The warmth and happiness in their home started fading away slowly, replaced by stress and anxiety. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she could help. She had never felt more helpless in her life. The idea of talking openly to strangers, asking people for assistance, or stepping into public spaces terrified her. She had always remained behind the scenes, comfortable in silence, but now life was forcing her out of that comfort zone. One day, while passing by the village market, she heard an announcement about a local talent competition. It was a yearly event, famous throughout nearby villages for its generous cash prize. Normally, she would have ignored such an announcement completely, as participating in public performances was beyond imagination for someone as shy as her. But this time, something deep inside her stopped her in her tracks. Her family's faces flashed before her eyes. Her father's weakening condition, her mother's hidden tears, and her brother's worried expression. She knew this might be her only chance to help her family. Walking back home, her heart raced with anxiety and doubt. Could she really do it? Could she stand on stage in front of hundreds of people? The thought alone made her shiver. But every step closer to home reminded her of why she needed to gather courage. She realized clearly this was no longer just about her fears or comfort. This was about survival, hope, and her family's happiness. From that evening onwards, she quietly started preparing herself, determined to conquer her fears. Nobody knew about her decision yet, and she wanted to keep it this way until she felt ready. Deep inside, she was terrified, but the thought of changing her family's difficult situation gave her strength. Her simple, ordinary life was about to change drastically, pushing her into the spotlight she never wanted, but desperately needed. That night, sleep didn't come easy. She kept turning from side to side, her mind filled with thoughts she had never faced before. Her heart was heavy, but somewhere deep inside, there was a small spark of courage trying to shine. She had made a silent promise to herself to take part in that talent competition. It wasn't about winning fame or showing off. It was only about trying, for her family, for her father's treatment, and for some hope. The next morning, everything seemed the same on the outside. Birds chirped, her mother prepared tea, and her brother got dressed to go out and look for work. But something inside her had changed. She had made a decision, and even though fear was still there, it didn't feel as strong as before. She kept quiet about it. Nobody knew what she was planning. She wasn't ready to speak about it just yet. After finishing her household chores, she found a small notebook and pen. She began writing a poem. Words came slowly at first, but as she remembered her life, her struggles, and the pain her family had faced, the words started flowing. They weren't fancy words, but they were real, filled with emotion and truth. It felt like she was pouring her heart out on paper. For the next few days, whenever she got a free moment, she would sit alone and practice. She read the lines out loud in a soft voice, trying not to be heard. She stood in front of a mirror, imagining herself on stage. Sometimes she would stop in the middle, heart pounding, palms sweating. The thought of standing in front of a crowd scared her so much that she almost gave up. But then she would close her eyes and see her mother's tired face, her father's weak hands, and her brother's quiet sadness. That gave her the push she needed to continue. One evening, as she stood practicing behind their small house, and her old neighbor walked by and noticed her. He paused and listened for a while. She felt embarrassed and stopped immediately, but instead of laughing or teasing, the old man smiled gently and said, "Tumhare lafzon mein asar hai. Kabhi kabhi dil se nikli baat sab kuch badal deti hai." His words stayed with her. She had never thought of herself as someone who could move hearts. But now she started to believe. Maybe she had something worth sharing. Still, the fear didn't leave her. Every time she thought about the stage, her legs felt weak. But she kept reminding herself, this wasn't about showing confidence. This was about facing reality. She didn't have time to wait until she was ready. Her family needed help now. Her father's health was slipping day by day, and the medicine bills were growing heavier. Time was not on their side. As the day of the event came closer, posters and banners started appearing around the village. Everyone was talking about it. It was a big event. People from nearby towns were coming to watch. She felt the pressure building, but she also knew this might be her only chance. She didn't want to regret not trying. Even if she failed, she would know she did something brave. She quietly went and registered her name. The man at the counter looked surprised, probably because he had never seen her in public before. But she kept her head down and signed the form. Her hands were shaking, but her heart was steady. She was now officially part of the competition. There was no going back. In the days leading up to the competition, her anxiety grew stronger. There were nights when she couldn't sleep at all, lying wide awake, thinking about the performance. The idea of standing in front of an audience, her voice trembling and all eyes on her, felt like a nightmare. She tried to stay calm, but the thought of making a mistake in front of everyone was terrifying. What if she forgot the words? What if they laughed? The pressure felt unbearable at times. She began questioning herself more. Was she really good enough to stand on that stage? Her hands would shake just thinking about it. What if she couldn't speak clearly or get her message across? Her heart raced with these thoughts. But in her quieter moments, when the house was still and the world outside was asleep, she would sit alone in her room and read the poem she had written. Each line, each word felt like a piece of her soul on paper. Slowly, she began to realize something. Her words were real, and they came from a place inside her that was stronger than her fear. She remembered how, just days ago, she had been uncertain and afraid. Now, as she read her poem, she felt a quiet confidence beginning to grow. It wasn't about performing perfectly, it was about sharing her truth, about showing people the rawness of her emotions. The more she practiced, the more she realized that this wasn't just a competition for her. It was her chance to speak for her family, for all the struggles they had been through, and for the strength they had to summon every day just to survive. The poem wasn't just about winning, it was about survival, about hope, and about resilience. One evening, after a particularly long day of rehearsing, She found herself sitting on the steps of their house, staring at the sunset. The cool breeze brushed against her face as she closed her eyes and let the world quiet down. Her mind was still racing with worries, but for a brief moment it all slowed down. She realized that, no matter how scared she was, no matter how uncertain the future seemed, she had already made it this far. She had taken the first step, and that was something to be proud of. Her mother came out to sit beside her, quietly watching. Her daughter. The warmth of her presence brought a sense of calm. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat next to her, offering silent support. But after a few minutes, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You're doing something very brave, my child. I don't know if you'll win, but just stepping up like this shows how much strength you have inside." Her mother's words were like a balm to her troubled mind. She didn't need anyone to tell her how to win or what to say on stage. What mattered now was her heart, the strength that came from deep inside. For the first time in days, she felt a little lighter. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. It was just another feeling, one that she knew she could handle. Over the next few days, she continued to practice, sometimes in the safety of her room, sometimes out in the garden when no one was around. She would pause, take a deep breath, and remind herself why she was doing this. For her father, for her mother, for her brother, for the family that had always supported her, even when things were hard. The more she practiced, the more she realized that this wasn't just about the competition anymore. It was about breaking free from the chains of fear that had held her back for so long. It was about finding her voice and using it to make a difference, not just for herself, but for those she loved. Her family still didn't know what she was planning, but she knew that once she stepped onto that stage, there would be no turning back. It wasn't about winning the prize money anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could do this. She could stand tall, face her fears, and be the voice her family needed. And that, in itself, was a victory. The big day arrived, and everything seemed to move in slow motion. The morning felt unusually quiet, as if the entire world was holding its breath. She woke up early, but the normal morning routine felt different. Her heart was racing, her hands were cold, and the nervousness was so overwhelming that it almost felt like she couldn't breathe. Yet, she still pushed herself through the morning chores, pretending everything was normal. Her mother and brother had no idea what she was about to do. They went on with their usual day, their worries hidden beneath forced smiles. She decided to keep the secret to herself, even though a part of her wanted to share it with her mother. But there was something inside her that told her it wasn't time yet. She didn't want anyone to stop her now, not even the people who cared about her most. She had made up her mind, and she couldn't back down. By the time the afternoon came, she was ready. But as she walked towards the venue, she felt like her legs were made of jelly. Every step felt heavier than the last. She tried to focus on the goal, just stepping onto the stage, speaking her words, and doing her best. She could almost hear her own heartbeat in her ears. It wasn't just fear, it was a mix of excitement and dread swirling inside her. The venue was buzzing with activity when she arrived. There were more people than she had imagined, and the space was filled with chatter, laughter, and nervous energy. People were gathered in groups, some warming up, others practicing their lines, all under the watchful eyes of the judges who sat at the front. She tried not to look at them, focusing instead on finding a quiet corner where she could gather her thoughts. The noise and the crowd made her feel small, like she didn't belong there. But she forced herself to breathe and remind herself that this was her moment. She had worked so hard for this. As she walked around the hall, she could see people of all ages, some confident, others just as nervous as she was. There were dancers practicing their moves, singers rehearsing their songs, and storytellers going over their lines. They all seemed so confident in their talents, their skills polished by years of practice. But for her, this was completely new. She hadn't prepared for the competition like they had. She didn't have years of experience. What she had was a heart full of emotions and a story to tell. The organizers called for everyone to take their places, and suddenly, it was her turn. She could feel her stomach twisting into knots, her mouth dry. She wanted to run, to disappear, to turn back. But there was no time for that. The spotlight was already on her. She stepped forward, her legs shaky, her palms sweating. The noise from the crowd faded away as she made her way to the stage. It felt like everything had become distant, as if she were walking in slow motion. When she finally stood on the stage, the lights hit her face, blinding her for a moment. The audience seemed to blur in front of her eyes. She could hear them whispering, but their voices felt far away. She stood there for a moment, frozen in place, the fear gripping her tightly. For a second, she thought she might forget everything. But then she took a deep breath. Her mother's words came to her. "You are stronger than you think." She closed her eyes for a moment, gathered all her courage, and opened them again. Slowly, she began to speak. The words were shaky at first, but as she continued, they started flowing more smoothly. She talked about her family, the struggles they had faced, the fear they lived with every day. She spoke of the love that had kept them together, of how they had survived despite the odds. As she spoke, she felt something shift inside her. The nerves were still there, but they didn't control her anymore. Her words started to have power. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding. She wasn't pretending to be someone else. She was sharing her story, her truth, and it felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The more she spoke, the more she felt in control, as though she were connecting not just with the audience, but with herself. By the time she finished, she was out of breath, but there was a sense of relief that flooded over her. The crowd remained silent for a moment, and she thought she had failed, that she hadn't done enough. But then, the applause started. It was slow at first, but soon the whole room erupted in a standing ovation. She stood there, stunned, as the audience cheered for her. She hadn't expected this. This was beyond anything she had imagined. She hadn't just shared her poem. She had shared a part of herself, and it had connected with them. In that moment, she realized something. The stage wasn't the enemy. It was a place where she had found her voice, where her fears had been transformed into something powerful. She wasn't just there to win a prize. She was there to speak her truth, and that, she now knew, was the greatest victory of all. The applause still echoed in her ears, and for a moment she just stood there, not fully able to comprehend what had just happened. She felt a strange mix of emotions, nervousness, excitement, disbelief, but most of all, relief. She had done it. She had faced her fears, stood in front of that massive crowd, and shared her story. In that moment, she felt something she had never felt before, proud of herself. As the audience's applause slowly faded, she walked off the stage, her legs still a little shaky, but her heart was lighter. The lights that had felt so blinding earlier now seemed dimmer, and the overwhelming noise of the crowd began to feel less intimidating. She couldn't help but smile. She had done it, and no matter what happened next, she knew she had accomplished something that, just a few days ago, would have seemed impossible. Backstage, she was greeted by some of the other participants. Some of them had already performed, while others were still waiting for their turn. They all came up to her, offering congratulations and smiles. She had expected to feel out of place, but instead, they treated her like she had been part of the competition all along. The nervousness she had felt earlier began to fade away as she realized that they weren't competitors. They were all there to support each other. It wasn't about who was better, but about sharing something meaningful with the audience. One of the judges, a woman who had been watching her performance closely, approached her and asked if she was okay. Her voice was kind, and her eyes showed genuine interest. The woman told her that her performance had been moving and that she had a real gift for storytelling. Her words felt like a balm to her still tingling nerves. She had expected to feel small, unnoticed, but here she was, being recognized for something she had never thought possible. Even though the performance was over, her heart still raced with excitement. She couldn't stop smiling. Her mind kept replaying her time on stage. She had spoken her truth, and it had resonated with the audience. She hadn't just delivered a poem, she had shared a piece of herself, and that made all the difference. The fear that had once felt like a huge barrier had turned into something that pushed her forward, and in that moment, she realized how powerful it was to face fear head-on. The competition moved on, and she watched as other participants took their turns on stage. Some sang beautifully, some danced with grace, and some told stories that made the crowd laugh or cry. But her mind kept drifting back to her performance. What had made it special wasn't just the words she had spoken. It was the authenticity behind them. She had been real. She had let her emotions guide her, and in return, the audience had responded. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the experience. When the final moments of the competition arrived and the judges were about to announce the winners, she felt a familiar wave of nerves wash over her. She had never expected to win. Just being part of it felt like a victory in itself. She had gained something far more valuable than a prize. She had gained confidence in herself, in her voice, and in her ability to overcome challenges. As the announcer began to call out the names of the winners, she held her breath. Her name wasn't called, but somehow it didn't matter. She wasn't upset, not in the least. In fact, she felt at peace. The experience had already given her something far beyond what a prize could offer. She had found courage, and that was the real reward. After the event ended, she quietly walked back home. The evening air felt cool, and the sounds of the village surrounded her. She wasn't alone in her thoughts. Her family, her struggles, her hopes, all of them were with her as she walked. The road back home didn't feel as long or as difficult anymore. She entered her house quietly, not wanting to disturb her family. They were gathered around the table, eating dinner together, as usual. Her mother smiled at her when she entered, and she smiled back. It was as though nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. Her brother, who had been looking down, suddenly lifted his head and noticed the way she was walking. He gave her a puzzled look, but before he could ask anything, she simply smiled and shook her head. The answers didn't need to be spoken out loud. Her performance, her courage, her growth, she didn't need anyone to confirm it. She knew deep down that she had changed. She sat down to dinner, the simple act of eating together suddenly feeling more meaningful than it ever had before. And as she looked around at her family, she realized that the journey wasn't over. This was just the beginning. What she had learned that day would stay with her for the rest of her life. The applause had faded, the judges had moved on to other tasks, and the competition was over. But what mattered now was that she had found her voice, and that, she knew, was something that would never fade. The days after the competition felt surreal. It was as if everything had shifted, even though life at home was mostly the same. She still woke up early, helped her mother with the chores, and her father's health was still fragile. But something had changed within her. She wasn't the same person who had once shied away from the spotlight, the one who had felt paralyzed by fear. That girl, the one who had lived quietly in the background, had transformed. The first sign of change came when she realized her fear of speaking in front of others had faded. At the market one afternoon, she found herself chatting easily with a neighbor she had barely spoken to before. She no longer hesitated or looked for an excuse to stay in the background. People started noticing the difference in her. There was a new confidence in the way she carried herself, in the way she interacted with others. The once quiet girl now had a presence, something that was hard to miss. Her family noticed it too. Her mother, who had always seen her as the shy, introverted one, began to see a strength in her that she hadn't known existed. Her brother, who had been so focused on his own struggles, looked at her with a new sense of respect. He noticed how she stood taller now, how her eyes shone with purpose. The house, which had been filled with a quiet tension for so long, now felt different. There was a shift in the air, a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. And then, something amazing happened. The organizer of the talent competition called her one afternoon. She had completely forgotten about the event after it had ended, but the call brought back the rush of memories. The organizer told her that she had been selected as the winner of the competition. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected it. She hadn't even thought about winning. But here it was, the recognition for her courage and her effort. The prize money was more than she could have ever imagined. It was enough to cover her father's medical expenses for several months and even help her brother find a new job. The weight that had been on her family's shoulders for so long seemed to lighten, even if just a little. But the money wasn't the most important part. What mattered was the fact that she had taken a step when everything seemed impossible, and in doing so, she had not only helped her family, but had also helped herself. She used the prize money to get her father the medical care he needed. It wasn't a cure, but it gave him hope. For the first time in months, he seemed to find some strength in his step. He smiled more often, and the house felt warmer. The doctors, who had been so grim about his condition, now seemed a little more hopeful. It wasn't a miracle, but it was progress. And that was enough for them. Her brother, too, found new work. It wasn't exactly what he had hoped for, but it was a start. He worked hard and began saving again, determined to get their family back on track. The family began to move forward, one step at a time. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they had hope now. They had a chance. But more than the money or the recognition, what had changed the most was her own sense of self-worth. She had proven to herself that she could face fear and come out stronger on the other side. She had stood on that stage, not just to perform, but to show the world, and more importantly, herself, that she was capable of much more than she had ever thought. She started to think about the future in a different way. She no longer saw herself as someone who was always hiding behind the walls of her own fear. She saw herself as someone with a voice, someone who had a story to share. The idea of standing in front of others no longer filled her with dread. In fact, she began to consider other ways she could use her voice to help others. She thought about starting a community group, or maybe even speaking at local events, sharing her story to inspire others who might be in the same position she had once been. And then, one evening, she sat with her family around the table, just as they always had. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of freshly cooked food, and the warmth of being together. Her father, though still frail, looked more content than he had in a long time. Her brother was smiling, talking about his new job and the small victories he was having. And her mother, looking at her with pride in her eyes, said something that touched her deeply. "I knew there was something special about you all along," her mother said softly. "You just needed to see it in yourself." In that moment, she realized something. It wasn't just about overcoming fear or facing a challenge. It was about believing in herself, trusting that she had the strength to change things, even when everything seemed impossible. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt ready for whatever came next. Because she knew, deep down, that no matter how hard life got, she had the courage to face it head on. And that was the greatest gift of all. As time passed, things began to settle into a new rhythm. Life was still challenging, but there was now a sense of possibility that had been missing before. She had learned more than just how to stand on stage. She had learned how to stand up for herself and her family, how to face the hardest moments in life with grace, and how to never give up, even when the path seemed impossible. Her confidence grew, not because everything had magically improved, but because she had discovered something important about herself. She realized that true strength wasn't about being fearless, but about having the courage to take action despite the fear. Every challenge she faced after that moment on stage became easier to handle, because she knew that no matter what happened, she had the ability to face it, One of the most powerful changes she experienced was the way she started to see others. She began to understand the struggles people around her were going through. She saw how everyone carried their own burdens, hidden behind smiles or quiet silences. And just like her, they too needed to believe in themselves, to find the courage, to face their own fears and challenges. She started helping others whenever she could, offering a kind word, a listening ear, or simply sharing her story. She knew that sometimes, all it took to lift someone up was showing them that they weren't alone in their struggles. Her story began to spread within the community. At first, people had been surprised by her performance, by how someone so quiet and shy had stepped up in such a big way. But soon, people came to her for advice, asking her how she had found the strength to change. She wasn't an expert, and she didn't have all the answers, but she shared her journey openly, hoping that it might inspire someone else to take that first step, just as she had. She started volunteering at local events, speaking to young people about facing their fears and believing in themselves. At first, it was small groups, but soon the invitations started coming from larger gatherings. She shared her story not for fame or recognition, but because she knew how powerful it was to connect with others, to show them that change was possible, no matter where they started from. Her family, too, began to see her differently. They had always loved her, but now they respected her in a new way. Her mother often spoke about how proud she was of her daughter, not just for winning the competition, but for the courage she had shown when life was at its hardest. Her father, though still fragile, had a new spark in his eyes. He was grateful, not only for the help he had received, but for the daughter who had helped to bring the family back together. Her brother, too, had learned from her example. He had always been the one to take care of things. But now, he saw how important it was to be strong emotionally, not just physically. As the months passed, things began to improve for them. They weren't rich, but they were stable. Her father's health improved enough for him to return to work part-time, and her brother was able to find a steady job. The family could finally start to dream again, not of escaping their struggles, but of building a better future together. But the most important change was within her. She realized that the fear she had once felt was no longer a barrier, but a challenge to overcome. She knew that life wouldn't always be easy, but she also knew that whatever came next, she had the strength to face it. It wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about having the courage to take each step, even when the way forward wasn't clear. Looking back on everything, she could see how much she had grown. She wasn't the same person who had walked onto that stage months ago, filled with fear and doubt. Now, she was someone who faced the world with an open heart, ready to take on whatever came next. The competition had been the catalyst, but the real transformation had happened in the quiet moments afterward, the moments when she decided to keep going, no matter how hard it got. One evening, sitting quietly with her family, she realized something. Her journey wasn't just about overcoming her fears. It was about finding her voice and using it to help others find theirs. She had become more than just a daughter or a sister. She had become someone who could inspire change not only in her own life, but in the lives of those around her. And as she sat there, looking at the faces of the people she loved, she knew that this was just the beginning. She wasn't done yet. The world was still full of challenges, but now she was ready to meet them head-on, knowing that no matter what happened, she would never stop fighting for herself, for her family, and for the people who needed her most.